Good morning, everybody here. Thank you for coming for this special day today. And before I will explain by few remarks, and Wess Mitchell as well, who is working together with us on that, I will give the floor or invite here to the microphone Ivan Langer, who was the long-time Interior Minister in 3 consecutive governments, and who is also, most importantly, the founder and the CEO of several institutes.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you here at our college, Several Institute. I'm glad that such interesting issue as the US and Czech partnership is going to be discussed today. I'm glad because there is still a quite high number of people who do not think that developing this partnership is important. Not only in Czech Republic, but also in Europe, there are quite a lot of people who do not believe in Euro-Atlantic partnership as its own. And that's why I'm glad that you are here, because here in Several Institute we do believe in it. And we are ready not only to listen, to speak, but also to work on this partnership, think how to develop it, how to strengthen it. And I strongly believe that this day, this conference is a great occasion how to enrich ourselves about our ideas, what to do. And I hope that you're going to spend a useful and good day. And at the end of my opening speech, I would like to ensure you that our minds are open, the gate of our college is open for you, and so that I do believe that we do not see each other for the last time. I do believe that I will have the privilege to welcome you sometime soon in the future. Last remark, as Sasha reminded me before this opening, we have a special week in Several Institute. We name it American Week because the day before yesterday we had a wonderful visit here at our college, a former governor of Florida and future, who knows, Jeb Bush. And it was a very fruitful discussion we had with him, and so that I can again assure you that here at our college we really believe in partnership between our country with the United States of America. Wish you a pleasant stay and good luck. Thank you.
So thank you for this welcome, and now I will try briefly to explain first of all the purpose of this exercise, which will be held today, the whole day. This conference or seminar is a part of, I would say, a larger project, a year-long project, which is trying to focus on analyzing, on one hand, the current stage of the Czech-American relationship, and on the other hand, most importantly, to focus on some recommendation for the future. It's done in a cooperation of 2 institutions, so Center for Transatlantic Relations here at Several Institute, and our partner organization is CEPA, run by Wess Mitchell, who will say also a few remarks here on the beginning. I have to thank CEPA for doing this with us, and have to tell you that CEPA, the Center for European Policy Analysis, it's, I would say, maybe unfortunately, the last real think tank in Washington who really deals specifically with the relationship between America on one hand and Central Europe on the other hand. My thanks also goes to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Prague, which supported this project. We have started in early May of this year with the similar conference in Washington, which was visited by the Czech Minister of Defense, which was addressed also by the two ambassadors, Ambassador Gandalovic and Ambassador Eisen, as well as by many American opinion makers who specialized in this arena. So we had Kurt Volker, former US ambassador to NATO. We had Damon Wilson, former advisor to the president and now running the huge program of the Atlantic Council. We had also special consultation with Madeleine Albright, David Kramer, director of Freedom House, Paula Dobriansky, former Undersecretary of State, and many, many others has visited our seminar. What is the purpose? The purpose is, with the end of this year, to create some, I would say, a realistic recommendation for the future Czech-American relationship. Why realistic? Because we do have a feeling that, to a certain sense, the scissors between a certain expectation or maybe related even with the achievement in the past and with the reality as it is seen now are getting wide, and it's not the best way to have, for example, great expectation and then to recognize the real thing. So I ask the American guests, and we do have 4 for this gathering today, to prepare policy papers to open the debate, and I ask them, please be frank with us. Don't paint the picture with a pink or rosy colors. And I have read all the papers, and all the papers either are already available for you in the room, definitely for this panel. The other one will be distributed a little bit later, but you can read them too and recognize that I am right. So many thanks for doing this frank assessment for us, where we are and what is the potential for future. In selecting this group of 4 distinguished people, I was trying, to mix a wide range portfolio. So we do have here Bruce Jackson. There are 2 men who deserved extraordinary credit for the NATO enlargement. On the Democratic side, it was Ron Asmus, a strategic thinker who was shaping the thinking within the Clinton administration, which started as a very weak on this originally, into a decisive movement forward. Ron, unfortunately, is no more with us. He has passed away as a young man because of the leukemia. So we lost him. The second one, not just the strategic thinker, but also the operator, is Bruce Jackson, who is the Republican and founding father of what was the key instrument in convincing the Americans from the administration to Congress, from Democrats to the Republicans. So somebody who deserves certainly a lot of credit for our key success which we have achieved at the end of the 90s of the last century. Cameron Munter is another important man. He was the young diplomat in the service of the State Department who was preparing the famous visit of Václav Havel in February 1990. During the time of the NATO enlargement, he was heading, together with Jeremy Rosner, the Nero office. Nero, you know, this famous Roman emperor. Nero was the NATO enlargement ratification office. So the unit working in the White House, which was responsible for successfully completing the ratification in the US Senate. Then was the ambassador in Belgrade and in Pakistan at the time when Americans successfully hunted bin Laden. John Glenn, another interesting person, he spent as a very young guy the year 1989 in Prague. As a young man living in a Czech family, he was coming already in summer, so he has known, you know, what does it mean, you know, the confrontation with the totalitarian regime. Then he has developed himself as one of the leading experts on the foreign policy, taking part at various German Marshall Fund gatherings and also taking an active part in Obama campaign, so Democrat. And on the other hand, the last but not least is Wess Mitchell, a man with a military background, hawkish stand on the security issue, and most of all, the man who is really leading the last think tank, which has in the mind as well as in the heart the Central European Affairs. So you see the balance. You have here Bruce Jackson as, you know, getting older, so he's something like a Kissinger. You have Wess Mitchell, you know, hawkish John McCain. You have John Glenn as Obama, and you have Cameron Manter as, I would say, Hillary Clinton, or so the balanced approach in the podium of the Institute, which is, of course, mostly the liberal conservative gathering. So that's where we are. I don't want to speak so long. That's their time now. I'm here mostly to listen and then trying somehow to sum up the debate. But last but not least, when we were talking when exactly to meet, we have agreed with Wess that 9/11 in Prague is not a bad idea. It's 13 years ago when America was attacked, right today. So that was a time when everybody in a very spontaneous way in Europe, from Prague to Berlin, from Bratislava to London, was declaring we are all New Yorkers, we are all Americans. Then, of course, the issues in transatlantic relationship get more harder once they are facing the realities. But it does not change anything on, I think, the key interest, at least as I feel this still in Prague, that we vitally need the American engagement in Europe, simply because the Europeans, the Czechs, as well as the others on one hand, and the Americans on the other hand, needs each other, not just now, but in future as well. So thank you very much, and Wess, the floor is yours.
Well, I understand that in the Czech Republic you have a tradition of your statesmen also being playwrights, and I think that Sasha's keeping that tradition alive. I think we've been cast as characters in a play, and I think we now know what roles we're supposed to play, so I feel like it's my obligation to be more militaristic and hawkish than I would normally be. But I do want to thank Sevro and its founder, and particularly Sasha Vondra, for the opportunity to co-host today's event. Sasha was very kind with his opening remarks about CEPA. I'll just say briefly that we are the only think tank in Washington that exclusively deals with Central and Eastern Europe. There are a lot of other talented people in Washington who deal with the region and who care about it. But CEPA's mission is special. We exist to promote an economically vibrant, geopolitically stable, and politically free Central Europe with close and enduring ties to the United States. And I think it's good in the Czech Republic to see that that Euro-Atlantic spirit is alive and well 25 years after 1989. We don't take that for granted, and I think for certainly most of my career and most of the last decade or so, discussions among Atlanticists like this today have been very common, but they've been a little bit like I said to Sasha last night, the name of the restaurant across the street, the Bubble Lounge, where you feel like you're in a bubble and you're talking to the same people that you've seen at all of these conferences in the past. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that, but I'm not sure that conversations like this have always been entirely relevant. I'm not sure that there's always been a clear strategic purpose for the Euro-Atlantic mission in Central Europe in the last few years. I think it's diminished as we've gotten further and further away from 1989 and the transition points of the 90s and early 2000s. And I think that has now changed dramatically. This is the anniversary of the September 11th attacks. And I don't know about you guys, but certainly for the Americans in this group, that was a life-changing moment. It's interesting to think of how much has changed in the world in the last 13 years. The scale of economic and geopolitical change that has taken place, but even within the last year. I mean, it's clear that we live in a time of profound geopolitical change. A year ago, when I think back to when Sasha asked us to co-host this series, and then I fast forward to the present, and I look at the world from an American or Central European perspective, it's astonishing the amount of change that's taking place all around us. I mean, in that period of time, since Sasha first talked to us, you now have a war in a country 1,200 kilometers from here that 3,000 people have now died in. ISIS has emerged as a lethal threat to U.S. and Western security. So I think the Bubble Lounge is no longer a bubble. And I think for reasons that, on one hand, as an Atlanticist, I welcome the renewed relevance of Atlanticism, but at the same time, there's no avoiding the fact that the threats to our security are very real. The threats to the Western order that we've enjoyed in the world, the U.S.-led security order, the Western order in general, I think are grave and are growing. And so discussions like this are important. I think they're even more important than they were a year ago or 5 years ago, and I'm hoping we can use that to our advantage today. We do have a group of people who I think will have a very frank exchange of views and are now clearly typecast into roles that I think it's our responsibility to perform. We're so grateful to have this opportunity to co-host with Severo and with Sasha and to see so many good Czech friends in the audience and look forward to a good discussion. So, thank you. Well, I think we have had a fairly strong introduction of certainly the Americans who are participating today, and you've got bios of all the participants, and our other two participants I'm sure are very well known to you and are known to the Americans as well. So I'm just going to be very pragmatic and jump straight into the panel. We'll hear from each of the panelists as you see them in sequence. I'll insert a few questions as the moderator, and then we'll open up to a Q&A. We're going to start with Bruce Jackson.
Oh, that was fast. First, let me correct Sasha Vondra's very generous introduction. He spoke correctly that it's regrettable that Ron Asmus is not with us. He failed to say, equally regrettably, Bruce Jackson still is. So we're here to talk. The assigned topic is the relationship between the United States and the Czech Republic, and by extension, Central Europe. My paper is called Small States and Worthless Allies. It basically argues that there were two major statements made about Central Europe. The first was the letter in 2009, which claims that a relationship was lost by inattention and disinterest largely on the part of America. And the second statement was made in a drunken restaurant in Poland that the United States is a worthless ally and the military relationship is bullshit. The question is, which of these statements is more true? I argue that the letter is more desirable and the Polish statement is more accurate. And so I think we have to differentiate between whether we're talking about desirability or we're talking about accuracy. And the metaphor here is there's a difference between a honeymoon and a marriage. They are two different states. A honeymoon does not give you any information about the conduct of the marriage. And frankly, an excessive concentration on the romance probably is a distraction from the marriage. And so if we take that as a metaphor and sort of turn to the problem, there is a general impression, well, first, is the United States a worthless ally, and what are the implications for small states in Central Europe if it is? And how can that be changed? The Czechs have generally emphasized the classic relationships between great powers, the military alliance or the trade alliance, the big things. I'm not sure that's working because basically this conference is motivated not to claim success, but to claim disappointment. So there's obviously, empirically, it's not going as well as we had all hoped. So let's look at that. I don't think this is a specific condition to the Czech Republic. I think it's a general condition to small states. Because Georgia, Montenegro, all the Baltic states have expressed roughly the same sentiments. And I think that's essentially the problem of small states. Small states prefer security relationships with distant powers, because that basically offsets the problem of their neighbors. Generally, this thing works. It's a classic European diplomatic attempt, but it works better in a world where you have multiple states who fear rivals and have to compete with each other. It doesn't work very well when you have single superpowers who can afford to ignore things, but there's no threat of a rival intervening. If you look at the crises of the 20th century, whether it's Agadir or Abyssinia, the great powers went in not because they cared about the Abyssinia, they cared about their rival gaining advantage. So there's less incentives in today's world. There's no penalty for the United States staying out or being disinterested for a generation, because there's no threat of an immediate rival, at least up until now. Now, also, I think as Robert Capone has written, there is the problem of geography. As much as affection and cultural affinity and, in some cases, love between the countries, it doesn't change geography. When the United States looks at Central and Eastern Europe, it sees either a barrier to Russia or a bridge to Russia, depending on who's in power. That may not be the geopolitical interest of the Czech Republic or of Estonia. They may want quite different things. And those things, so that brings, a tension. It seems to me that empirically, great powers are far more likely to respond to the threat of a rival than to the alliance with a friend. That's just that's my Kissingerian moment. And it seems to me that there is, there's very good geographical reasons why a permanent alliance and, beyond the NATO alliance, which is a mutual defense treaty, has not held. And I want to talk a little bit about, one, the prehistory of the relationship and where its flaws were, and then talk about what I would suggest we do instead. Essentially, the letter of the Central and Eastern Europe argued that it's axiomatic that if we share a broad set of political and cultural values, these will engender a sense of responsibility to defend those values, and it will naturally result in these close affinities. I don't think that's true. I think states have different interests. And if you look at the beginning period, which is sort of the Camelot of President Havel, which was an extraordinary period, actually of a great world figure, a world historical figure, there were a lot of shared values, but they were cultural values. And they were never basically refined into practice. It seems to me there's a question whether shared values alone are the basis for bilateral relationships, unless they're translated into institutions and into practice. We can all like Frank Zappa, but that doesn't really get you very far. It doesn't basically predict what you're going to do tomorrow and how you'll respond to threats or how your trade patterns will go. They have to be translated into institutions. So it's not clear to me that shared values alone constitute a political alliance in the way we're using it today. I mean, you can have a shared opposition to anti-Semitism and a shared opposition to discrimination against lesbian, gays, and transsexuals. But is that the structure of international politics, or is that the export version of cultural preferences? Not clear to me. So, I mean, I think if you look at the original, first period, we had cultural values, but we didn't define them particularly well. And we also should be, with such an amazing honeymoon, it's not going to last. And I think that should have been recognized, and we should have been more clearer about it. In the second period, it was really Sasha Vondra that did the most to translate the emotions into the reality. And basically, he was the first to reach out to Germany and redefine a relationship. He was the first to basically look at the military relationship. And frankly, almost everything that was done was the first. But there was a frustration that these values existed in the abstract, but they hadn't been rendered into practice in institutions. So it seems to me that these values were so inchoate, they weren't a very good guide to statecraft and what you do. See, what use are political values if they don't lead to political outcomes in a one-to-one sense? And I think by the time we get to President Klaus, we could see that. We agreed on the same values, but we thought that they had different implications. For instance, go back to my marriage metaphor. I share values with my spouse, but I think they mean I should drink with my army buddies all night and come home at dawn. We should agree about the values, but we don't agree about the practice within those values. Klaus basically came to the opposite conclusion about everything. We thought there was going to be a Europe whole and free. He thought there should be less Europe. I mean, that's pretty basic. And we never talked through because we didn't really define them. And it seems to me that at this moment in history, we're not actually working on it. It's kind of a relief that we're not pretending that something existed that didn't exist. Now, this argument doesn't prove that a closer alliance is impossible. It just means the reasons adduced for this conclusion are false at the moment, and we can make them true, but it's an act in the future. So, one, it forces us to look at reality of what is possible. One of the things that I've noted is many things that the Czechs or Central Europeans or Estonians or Montenegro ask for at the moment are impossible in American politics. So you have to sort of look at the limits of the possible. The President of the United States was elected as a domestic president. That was his sort of great society president. And this has been reinforced by global recession, by the rise of Russia, by the disorders. So he's been forced into basically a position of functional isolationism. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So it would be absurd to ask a functional isolationist in declining defense budgets with war almost everywhere and retreating from 3 wars to basically increase the military aspect of our relationship. So I just think there's a little bit, the small state has to align with the reality of international politics at the time at which it wishes to increase its relationship. It seems to me that the conclusion, actually sometimes the President of the United States is telling you the truth. He doesn't tell you the truth about what he will do, he does tell you the truth about what he won't do. It's a little frustrating, but it is quite likely that the President of the United States has already concluded that the Russian aggression and the Ukrainian crisis make the case for soft power, not for hard power. So if I were a European, I would talk to them about the contribution Central and Eastern Europe make to soft power, rather than asking him something that he's already not going to do. So I think a little bit, those the gods would punish, they first grant their wishes. Central and Eastern Europe often asks for the wrong thing. Not to tease Sasha, but strategic defense was the wrong thing to ask for. Even Americans don't want it. Now, so if we look at the sort of 3 high-profile areas of transatlantic relationships, which are the military cooperation, the liberalized trade, and cross-border investment, for reasons having nothing to do with Central and Eastern Europe and everything to do with America, those are not likely to be enhanced. Defense budgets are going to come down in the United States. Liberalized trade is already in trouble and was unlikely to be ratified in the Senate until 2017 or 2018. And cross-border investment moves the way it wants to move. And it's going to react to market forces, not political forces. So I wouldn't basically hook my wagon to those three. I think there are a range of issues that I hope we discuss today where the Czech Republic enjoys a comparative advantage. Energy security is one of the most important issues in the Euro-Atlantic, and the Czechs have created a huge expertise and a great successful record on it, which I think could be further enhanced. Anyway, it seems to me if you look at, again, talking about the small states, there are small states that have been quite successful in this modern period. And they've done it by essentially, it seems to me, by pursuing three objectives. I think the first is a sense of independence, from daddy, because that doesn't work so well. But if you look at how Norway has carved out an expertise in energy and an independence from European institutions, if you look at the Swedes, how Carl Bildt largely has carved a definitive role in all aspects of foreign policy, and the Finns have turned a weakness of geography into a strength, in terms of trade and what they're able to do. So it's quite possible, and it seems to me that there are three areas. Great powers tend to notice groups in much the way they notice rivals. They do not notice individuals. If you look at the way the European Union is working from a political perspective, Europe functions more as a system of regional blocks than it does of an organization of member states. You have the Baltic-Nordic coordination zone, you have the Mediterranean political, you have the Iberian Peninsula thing. So the first rule in politics is create a region. The Visegrad, which the Czechs started, was the first thing that it needs to be enhanced. It's kind of fragmented a little bit as Poland joined Weimar and Viktor Orban went back to the 19th century or someplace. So basically, great powers are interested in countries that control blocks and groups. That needs to be redone in Central and Eastern Europe. The second rule is positions are better than policies. It seems to me that the Czechs have not done enough in pursuing international positions in Europe, WTO, IMF. If you want them to pay attention to you, or the United States, get to places where you're making future policy. Then they will. And first the Brits, then the Germans have basically done everything they can to get on every goddamn board from the IMF. It doesn't have to be NATO. It can be any of the organizations. And finally, I think this is a discussion which I associate with Mr. Bartuska. You have to basically define what's the comparative advantage that the Czech Republic has. It's not a military power. If we wanted a military alliance, we'd go to China. There's just a lot of other people that do that. The Czechs have a great military ability to diversify energy, to multiply sources better than anybody else, to build transit lines. Nobody else in Europe has done this. So I would focus, on that kind of thing. The short way of saying this, if the homely girl who is good at cooking, she should avoid that swimsuit competition because she's got a comparative advantage. She needs to go with that, not an advantage she doesn't have, which only draws attention. So it seems to me, as I've already said, that next to terrorism, energy security is the largest threat confronting the Western world. And this country happens to be virtually number one. They even have to borrow Czech diplomats if Sweden wants to run a presidency. Do more of that. Now, I'll stop sort of here. I'm just talking about the conceptual problems that are associated with the relationship you want to build. There's no point in building it today, because even if Obama wanted to reconsider the Czech relationship, he couldn't, and he doesn't want to. So we are where we are for at least the next elections, and there will be a year. So whatever comes out of this seminar has to be targeted at 2017 to 2018. That's when history becomes plastic again. It's not, it's sort of locked in concrete now. So Anyway, just to sum up, if the Czech Republic intends to court an American ally, which has already seen soft power as central to its future relationship with Europe, then energy security is the greatest of the soft powers. And it seems to me that that's the future, and it's something at the regional level, at the positional level, the international organization level, and at the conceptual level, we should spend the next 36 months working on.
Excellent. So Bruce, I'm going to do my best to poke a hole in your argument, and I'm going to ask a question that I'll ask a question after each presentation, and you guys can think about it. And then when we start the Q&A, you can talk. I mean, it's hard to argue with what you've put out, but I'm going to do my best. It seems like your basic message to the Czechs is we're only tied to you or interested in you or your region insofar as you are useful to us, right? So by forming regional blocs, by the policies you pursue, by finding a comparative advantage. That, in some sense, still seems to assume a single superpower world where there are no, so it seems to assume the United States doesn't have other compelling strategic reasons or permanent reasons that are rooted in something other than these small states' usefulness. So a compelling geopolitical reason, for example, to stabilize this crush zone between Germany and Russia that has brought the three great global conflicts of the 20th century. It seems to also assume that the Czech Republic doesn't have other options. The option, for example, of doing nothing, being passive, in a very protective geography. The option of the European Union, or even the option over time that Slovakia takes of accommodating Russian revisionist behavior. So my question for you would be, what are America's permanent strategic interests in Central Europe and in and around the Czech Republic? And does the Ukraine crisis underscore or shed light on those permanent strategic interests in ways that maybe make your argument less valid than they would have been a year ago? So, strategic interests.
You don't want me to answer that?
You can answer it now, or we can, yeah, we can wait and we can start at the beginning of the Q&A. So, John, go ahead.
Tak já bych chtěl začínat v češtině. Vlastně tady byl poprvé v létě v 89. Tak první den byl 21. srpna. To bylo výročí. Naštěstí nepokračuju v češtině pro vás, ale já bych chtěl začínat poděkovat Sašu Vondrovi a Wess za pozvánku, protože já jsem vždycky rád tady být. Sorry, Bruce. I was just thanking the invitation and the chance to be here. I really am honored and pleased to be here. I have been here, now this is just over 25 years. It's a place that I care a lot about and have watched, if I may say, somewhat closely. And yet I found myself thinking when coming to this seminar, what's the right perspective today to ask about US-Czech relations at a time when at home people are asking, is the world falling apart? And in preparation for the seminar, I was reading a review of a book about 1975 that struck me. It was a review in which it talked about this time as a period in which Americans were looking at a country and seeing what they called more wounds to its ideal of itself than at just about any other time in history. A criminal presidency, oil shock, inflation followed by stagflation, America's first military defeat, the ignominious fall of Saigon, congressional revelations of dark deeds by the CIA and the FBI, violent bankrupt cities, failed leaders, and on and on and on. And then you look today at the papers, and it's a world in which, you know, there's a third of Americans are in favor of impeaching the president. There are tens of thousands of Central Americans flooding, sending children into Texas. There's a plane crash in Mali. The evacuation of the Malaysian Air Flight 17 corpses goes on and on. There are Russian cross-border attacks on Ukraine, Israeli airstrikes on Gaza, and on and on and on. The review of the book says, future historians might conclude that the summer of 2014 felt apocalyptic to Americans, but instead, it's an anxious and depressing muddle, not unlike 1975. And it made me think, what was the perspective in 1975 in Czechoslovakia? And I remembered as I thought back, not only was this 7 years since the invasion of the Warsaw Pact countries, but this was the year Gustav Husak was elected president. This was the height of really existing socialism. This was the time of Václav Havel's letter to Husak, which will surely be familiar to this group, in which he said that while everything may appear calm and normal with people going about their jobs and daily lives, it was, quote, the calm of the morgue or of a grave, driven by the final and irrefutable proof that no citizen can hope to challenge the power of the state. It's not the first time we may be seeing the world from very different perspectives, and it's surely not the last. So I'd like to use that to talk about our issue of our interests. And in the spirit of friendship, I'd like to raise some concerns. It seems clear to me that I very often hear the notion, a conversation about US-Czech relations, based on the idea that everything was strong until with the Bush administration until 2008, but since then, they've weakened because the Obama administration has withdrawn from Eastern Europe and from global leadership more broadly. Let me quote a recent piece in the Wall Street Journal by Ed Lucas. Barack Obama is the worst president in the history of the Atlantic Alliance. He has infuriated Europeans who don't care about security and disappointed those who do. His administration breaks rules, disdains allies, and panders to foes. As a result, the standing of the US in Europe has never been lower, and as the world's most important security relationship has never been in a worse state. I'd like to suggest to you, and I will hope to demonstrate, that this is not so. This is not true, but in fact, it is an influential perspective that has itself harmed relationships because it has filtered it through a political lens. Frankly, I think in the United States, the Czech Republic was perceived as too close to the Bush administration, while in Europe, Czech relations with the US were seen as a sign of not being good Europeans. My argument will be simple. In addition to our close bilateral relations, Czech-US security relations could best be strengthened by a shared commitment to make NATO work better. It's interesting to follow on Bruce's comments about the need to institutionalize our values, because in many ways this is a point that I think is a point of commonality that we share. For NATO is our common shared security institutional relationship. And this is one where we can work best together. Now, lest this sound overly general or naive, I'll remind some of my friends who've known me for a while at the German Marshall Fund that this is precisely the same argument that I made during the Bush administration, when Europeans were talking about the worst president in the history of the Transatlantic Alliance, who infuriated allies and whose policies led to a spectacular decline in the image of the United States all around the world. I said then, while we may disagree on Iraq, it is not constructive for our relationship to be defined by it, because we have too many shared challenges that we need to focus on today. I would make the same argument today. Now, I've been asked to speak from the perspective of the Obama administration, and indeed, I can speak as a supporter and as one who served as an advisor to the Obama campaign, their advisory group on Europe and Eurasia in 2012, but I'm not someone who served in the administration, and I can't report on their inner policy deliberations nor represent their views. My thoughts are those of a long-term observer and friend of the Czech Republic, concerned that our relations be strong regardless of who's in the White House. Briefly, clearly we're in a situation of, Bruce talked about a marriage, I'll talk about a hangover. After 9/11, the Czech Republic was among the staunchest supporters of the United States. They entered Afghanistan and Iraq without caveats. They fought bravely. They were strong embracers of the so-called freedom agenda, perhaps especially with leadership around Cuba. They were advocates for missile defense, all of which I think led to a sense that the Czechs shared a worldview with the Bush administration, which, frankly, as a strong supporter of the democracy agenda, I've always found problematic. But after 2008, we saw a different situation. Prime Minister Topolánek called President Obama's economic policies after the financial collapse, you'll all remember, the road to hell. And in an unfortunate turn to US-Czech relations, 10 days before President Obama was due to arrive in Prague for the US-EU summit, the Czech government, then leading the rotating presidency of the European Union, collapsed due to internal intrigue. Rather than the classic image of Bill Clinton playing saxophone at Reduta on Národní, really not so far from here, you saw President Obama dining alone with his wife. Unfortunately, I think for our relations, Czech governments have tended to be unstable and inward-looking since that time, and I'm afraid I find it difficult to argue that President Zeman or President Klaus have sought to rebuild those strained ties. In the paper, I talk about Ukraine as an example, but I will just very briefly like to come back to the open letter from Eastern Europe and respectfully challenge my friend Sasha Vondra about it, and I feel compelled to say that I hope he will not see this in the spirit of being a poor guest and not appreciating hospitality or the invitation to be here, but that in the spirit of vigorous debate over something I know we both care about. So recently, CEPA, Wess's institution, held a really fruitful symposium on 5 years since the release of the letter. And in that, Sasha wrote, "Time has proven us right." And he's used the frame that I identified at the beginning of the paper. Until 2008, the West, under US leadership, was in an offensive posture, setting the agenda and delivering results. Since 2008, the West has taken a rather defensive and reactive posture. Why does this framing harm relations? I will simply say that perception is powerful, and framing arguments can have real-world consequences by shaping the perceptions and behavior of others. Just as things can improve through political leadership, urging a focus on a collective project, things can get worse when influential people argue they are declining. Now, I'd like to suggest that this perspective is not a full portrait of things, but also that there is a gap between this and the public. Quickly, was US leadership so strong and effective in 2008? Well, I went back to our mutual friend Ron Asmus's response to a letter to that, which he published under the German Marshall Fund, and he suggested otherwise at the time. He argued the letter was a warning that America's image in the region also needs repair, and that much of the damage had taken place in the years leading up to 2008. Now, a lot has been made of the fact that George W. Bush was more popular in Eastern Europe than in Western Europe. But if you look at the German Marshall Fund's Transatlantic Trends survey, you will see that, in fact, Barack Obama is far more popular in Eastern Europe today than Bush was in 2008. If you look at the review of the policies, of the support for the policies, 44% of polls supported George W. Bush in 2008, much higher than Western Europe. But today, it's 60% who approve of Barack Obama's leadership. It's a significant difference. The letter called on the Obama administration to reaffirm its vocation as a European power and develop new contingency plans for NATO. In his speech here in Prague in 2008, his first year in office, he declared the United States will never turn its back on the peoples of this nation. The administration has continued to travel. Hillary Clinton came in her time as Secretary of State 34 times to Europe. It's hard for me to argue that they have not come and affirmed the vocation. These contingency plans that were called for have in fact been developed, perhaps at the urging of the letter, but that's a different argument from the idea that 5 years later, nothing has changed. The letter expressed concern that the new administration might embrace Medvedev's proposal for a concert of powers. Well, 5 years later, it should be clear that's not happened. That was dismissed quite quickly by Secretary Clinton in Paris, and no one has paid attention to those issues. Missile defense is the turning point. Now, it's not clear in the essay whether it's seen as that the Obama decision to shift its missile defense policy was a caving in to Russian concerns, because it doesn't engage with the administration's assertion that it was changing the missile defense plans to strengthen the ability to address the actual nature of the threat from Iran. Sometimes it can seem that missile defense for the Czech Republic meant Russia, and missile defense for the United States meant Iran. So and we know there's a disconnect. I was here during the missile defense debate. I remember seeing the huge poster across from the Chernin Palace against the radar status here, and I remember seeing the public opinion polls that showed that nearly 2/3 of Czechs opposed the missile defense program at that time. I'm simply saying it's more complicated than that. Now, my argument is that simply we should work to make NATO better. Now, I know this country well, and I know what it means, and I know the debate about being a smaller country. But I think that the mistake is made is when we try to find sort of small niche, especially military projects, as the basis or foundation for our relationship, when in fact it is our shared institutional relationship and making NATO work better where it would be of tremendous value. Now, I think that Poland is a country that can show the way. If you look at this, you can see that Minister Sikorski, former President Kwasniewski, have been very prominent on the issues of Russia and Ukraine, very strong voices among the Eastern policy of the European Union. And I'm afraid I simply don't agree that because there are 10 million people in the Czech Republic and 40 million people in Poland, it's not possible here. I think President Havel showed otherwise, and it calls for leadership. The Czech voices, unfortunately, for my argument, offer caution. Following President Obama's visit to Warsaw earlier this year, where he promised new commitments to Eastern Europe, the Czech Prime Minister Sobotka said that he would not support more NATO troops in Europe, appearing to contradict his East European allies and sparking a debate in Prague. Revisiting missile defense does not appear to be the answer. When Senator McCain recently floated that idea, President Zeman gave a voice of caution. The Czech Republic has cut its military spending in recent years, although I read on my travel here that there's a proposal to raise it. But last year, it was a proposal to that it raise its spending of an additional 0.1% of GDP in 2015. I can read the Czech press. I read what a debate that sparked about whether even that would be possible, which raises questions about the real perception of the threat or not, if that's what you'll spend. In the paper, I talk a lot about deterrence, because I think that NATO's vision of what deterrence means is going to be the future for where that comes. I'd love to have that discussion and talk more about that in the Q&A, and hope that I've maybe set the stage for my belief that our relations must be strong. I think the US-Czech relations should be part of the solution rather than part of the problem to the challenge we face today.
Thank you for that, John. So it sounds to me like your basic argument is the harm that has taken place to U.S. Central European and U.S.-Czech relations is that we criticize U.S. policy at home in a partisan sense, rather than any flaws in the policy itself. And something about that seems disingenuous, or it seems like you're pulling a fast one on us. So I want to push on that a little bit. So the open letter, at the time that the open letter came out, I remember coming over to GMF, and Ron Asmus was there, and you were there, and I remember there was a big discussion about it. And the three big criticisms, if I could clump them into kind of categories of the open letter at the time, is number one, it was politically obtuse. It was a group of small countries of maybe limited value to the United States coming in, sort of nailing the theses on the door of the cathedral. Secondly, that it was an inaccurate depiction of Russia. That Russia, it was antagonistic in its view of Russia, that it was over-securitizing the concern about Russia. And number three, that it was undercutting possibility of a more positive relationship with Russia if we could just get the pieces in place in a policy sense. And if I look back on it, in retrospect, the first one was probably correct. I mean, with the political circumstances at the time, it didn't resonate. But the second and third, main criticisms haven't, to my mind, really been validated. And so it doesn't seem to me that you can assess Obama policy in quite the way that you're suggesting it could be assessed, especially without talking about the reset. So I have two questions for you. The first one is, was the reset a success? And the second one was, how does the letter now look in the context or in the aftermath of the crisis or the war in Ukraine? Those would be my two questions for you. Hinek.
Well, I will try to be a little bit shorter and a little bit probably engage the friends here, because what I did the first was that I read their papers and I prepared something as a reaction to them, but let me start that I will be very much at the same time in the same line with them, because I also see the Czech-American relation going from the honeymoon into the marriage, through hangover, and what depends after you have the hangover from the marriage. You divorce, which is not the option for us, or you reach maturity. What does it mean to reach maturity in the marriage? It means what Bruce says, to look for the limits of your real possibilities in the relation. And I think that's exactly what the Czech Republic is doing right now. We are, and actually we were in a certain way doing that since the beginning of the 90s, looking for the limits of our possibilities in the Czech-American, American-Czech relation. I fully agree that we started with the emotional phase, where we sort of seen the United States as the example of West which will not betray, because all the rest of the West already betrayed us at least once in the history. The United States was the only one where we had none or good experience. It was just partly true, because one could argue, if you go through Dobrinin memoirs, that the behavior of the United States in 1968 were not exactly exemplary, but it had its own historical reasons. This emotional phase was probably highest during the period of Clinton, Albright, Vondra, Havel. I visibly remember the discussions at the Conference of Ambassadors that time, where even among our neocon circles was the discussion if the Czech-American relation is not actually a relation not of the states, but personal. On the emotion-based personal relation, which can be characterized as Sasha Vondra and his friends, plus Madeleine Albright and her friends. And if that is really sustainable, and if it is translatable into the relation of the states, and even in neocon circles that time were the huge doubts that simply it is not sustainable, and we will go to the very different landscape once these people are not longer in decision-making positions. I agree also with you that there is a gap between what you call in your paper political elite and the Czech public. And nothing showed it better than the missile defense question, where basically the political elite, which is, let's translate who is political elite from the point of the Americans. Sometimes I still have the feeling that it's the group of roughly like 60 people out of 40 will be sitting here today. And you basically have no communication as the Americans with the rest of the society, which appeared for the first time with 2/3 of the people making argument against the missile defense, while the political elite was making basically argument for, because they were looking exactly for what Bruce suggested, the topic which will simply glue us with the strategic partnership with the United States. Because from the part of the emotion, we went through part of the contribution to the military operations, then to the part of discussing the missile defense, and then we ended up in today's time when we have just like two topics to discuss with the United States. Strategic partnership, which we try to survive the phase where the content is virtually zero, hoping that the Temelín will be the subject which will bring Americans back, because frankly I have the feeling that's the last thing which is interesting for them here. Now come the latest phase, where for the Czech-American relation came surprising savior, and it's Putin. Because I also agree with Bruce that this area is about Russia, and even for us it is about Russia. It's not just for Americans about Russia. And if we are in a way threatened by Russia, it goes to what you suggested, that the superpowers much better react to the threats than to alliances. So the Czech way would be to suggest that not only we are threatened by Russia, but we have something what we can propose to our allies to make us less worthless, which is our expertise on Russia. At the same time, you suggested that we should do 3 steps: create a region, take positions instead of policies, and find comparative advantage. So if our comparative advantage is, I agree, expertise on energy policy, it could be even broader, the expertise on the parts of our country east of our border. And that's something where we have usually much better language abilities than the Americans, and much better soul-searching abilities than the Americans, who still seem to look a little bit at Russians as a different type of Texas Go Wild. It's completely different, at least in my opinion. Create the region, you suggested. Yes, we try to create the region with the Visegrad countries. In one time, we even tried to create Visegrad plus Benelux blocking minority in the EU, and we were playing in basically getting to where the new American ambassador repeats all the time that we are punching about our weight. That's what we constantly try to do with the Visegrad. It's not easy in Visegrad, because if you look at the current Visegrad, you have Poland, which tries to be even bigger than it is. You have Slovakia, which one of you described as accommodating to Russian interests much more than the others. Then you have the classical problem with Viktor Orbán. And from our perspective, we seem to be the only, let's say, calming down force in Visegrad, and we do our best even to keep it together with the interests which are widely going in different directions. Taking positions, yes, I agree that it's much more important for smaller states to have people in decision-making positions than to proclaim the big policies nobody cared of. Yes, that's what we are trying now in NATO with General Petr Pavel. It's really the beginning, and it's another example how Visegrad works or doesn't work. If you go through European institutions, you will find that there will be probably like 7 Poles to 1 Czech, which is not a ratio of 4 to 1. Simply Polish were very, very effective in taking positions instead of the policies. I agree it worked for them. There could be the argument why we constantly are so able to find the candidates which are not sellable to Europe or NATO, because most of the time Czech have the tendency to send abroad people you don't want home, and that's their basic quality. I go through the rest if I have there. No, so my summary and easy recommendation is that I don't know if in this theater play where I am probably supposed to play Zeman, I would be more Kissinger or Hillary Clinton, but my argument would be that I agree with a rather realistic approach which you both presented in your paper. I agree that the interests of states are not based on personal emotions. I would even agree, I hope it doesn't make me Republican, that it's more how big you are and where on the map you are than about the shared values. On the other hand, I would agree with you that part of the problem of the Czech-American assessment of the relation is that it's going down in one group of the people who basically share the same views, that you all the time meet the same people. And I would not blame you for that, because if you start looking for something like the left-wing think tank in the Czech Republic, it virtually doesn't exist. If you try to speak to the left-wing people in Czech Republic, well, you will have a problem because you will have to use your Czech. Their language abilities are rather limited quite often if we don't speak about the younger generation, who are usually not in the decision-making positions in the Social Democratic Party, at least. So the result is that the Czechs have the problem to understand that Obama is basically a social democrat. And Americans have the problem to understand that Saša Vondra is a Czech Republican. And you should be looking for the Czech Democrats as well.
Thank you for that, Hinek. It's becoming more clear to me that there's a problem that I'm starting to get with this marriage analogy, and it's that it frames the relationship almost entirely as a matter of choice rather than necessity. And it's a common theme in all three of these, to some extent, that I see. And I think the danger of that, if I'm listening to what you've just said, is that it always leaves us looking at public opinion polls, which I put very little stock in over the long term, or the latest project that makes us useful to one another. And your point about the emotional foundation rather than the strategic foundation, I think there's a lot to that. I think you can find a lot of evidence for that. I guess, what that overlooks is, or maybe points towards as a question, is what is the underlying strategic rationale for the relationship? Is the relationship, if we set aside the emotional linkages of the last 25 years, my question for you would be, and it's kind of a companion to the question to Bruce, is what is the Czech Republic's permanent strategic interest in a relationship with the United States, if you think there is one? And has the Ukraine crisis made that strategic interest more or less obvious? Jiří.
Thank you, Wess. I was asking myself a question, what is strategic in our relationship? Isn't it just a joke to speak about strategic relationship between a country in our position, of our size, and the United States? And I would try to maybe to dig more into that, and I hope I will not answer to a question you posed to Hinek completely, but that was exactly the question I was trying to ask myself. Of course, in our relations nowadays, there are no big names, no big stories, big narratives. This is over. And maybe we have been too much spending on trying to develop the historical narrative. I remember in the 90s, on the run-up to the enlargement, we were doing together with the New Atlantic Initiative the Pilsen talks. There was a lot of sentiment for, kind of General Patton, liberating Pilsen, and this kind of sentiment. Actually, I think it was sort of past-oriented, sentimental thing, which I understand as a PR for the conference, also important, but I don't think it was the right direction. And by the way, the history of liberation of this strip of Western Czechoslovakia, I think it's not the best. We try to paint it in the most bright colors, but that was the first element of division of Europe, because there was agreed upon dividing the line of separation. Now, I will go into analyzing a little bit of what are the interests of each other into this relationship, and my key question is, who are the carriers of this interest? In other terms, Bruce called it institutions. What are the carriers? Do we have an instruments for these interests to meet? And before doing that, I will challenge completely the question of distant ally notion. This is a myth. unless, you know, this is a myth to the extent that unless you have a soldier of your allies on your territory. I mean, there was this famous quote by a French general who said in 1916, you know, he was asked how many American troops he needs on the French territory in the World War, and he said, I need one, and he will be immediately killed. You know, that's the point. If you don't have a soldier of your distant ally, at least one, to be killed. I mean, this is not a reliable alliance. And especially if it's seen as a counterweight to your neighbors. I think the only reasonable alliance you can create with your neighbors. We have extremely good position now, and we tend to forget that we are in one alliance, with the exception of Austria, and we are part of one security area with our neighbors. To maintain that, we need US. I mean, this is the strategic interest of Czech Republic on United States. We don't need US as an exclusive ally on which US doesn't have an interest at all. But we do have an interest, and maybe there is some shade of interest in the United States still, and I will develop on that, to maintain this most favorable environment we have ever had in our modern history. That we are in friendly terms, not only in friendly terms, but we are allies with our neighbors. That's, I think, our interest. Now, I will ask myself, what is the US strategy towards not Central Europe, but towards Europe? I've recently heard Americans saying that Europe whole and free has been accomplished. Wow, I have my doubts. I don't see a lot of unfinished business in the Balkans, and I see the war in the East. But what's the view in Washington? The perception matters. Because the context of this notion that Europe whole and free has been basically accomplished was that we are talking about so-called Asian pivot of US. Another, I think, misleading assumption for this pivot was that basically the Arab Spring would be a successful movement which will actually relieve United States from its strategic role in the region. Another false assumption. But I'm asking about Europe and US strategy towards Europe. Wess has been mentioned, another assumption that, successful reset will enable, US to engage more in Asia. Now, the Czech strategy, I was trying to describe in one sentence. Let me develop on that a little bit. Our interest is to overcome divisions. We wouldn't like to be, again, a frontline state. It was enough to be a frontline state. And we didn't want to jump over the fence to become a frontline state from the other side. So it leads me to our strategic interest not to lose Slovakia. This is our strategic underpinning for our relations with the Slovaks. Now, this can be agreed by almost everyone, not only in this room, but also beyond this room, Hinek. The problem is that you have those, I wouldn't call them neocons, I don't know this kind of fashion of labeling everyone being a neocon. I know some more sexy labels than that. But anyway, let's call me the first group Atlantist. And the Atlanticists want to achieve this goal of overcoming division, maintaining this friendly center Europe, holding together, with the US as a part of the game. And there are others who want this, who think that it can be done, but not in association with the US. Some of them are Europeanists, some of them are, not even EU fans, sovereignists that, let's build a good center Europe without anyone. Kind of concentric concept of the policy. So we agree on the goal, but we don't agree on the role of the United States in this. Now, talking concrete about the institutions, the carriers of our relationship, however strategic or not strategic it may be. Now, let's talk about those which could have strategic implications. Yeah. First of all, political institutions. Central Europe, V4 has been mentioned. We have to be frank to others. We are on the map of Washington only if we are able to cooperate as a region. Otherwise, Czech Republic as, single country doesn't make interest to anyone, especially if it's not a frontline state, and that would be too late for us. But European Union, I see a big difference, and still, although US was accused of playing differences during a Bush era, Rumsfeld, old New Europe, but it can be proven that US is probably one of the biggest supporters and believers in European integration so far, whereas Russia is not. That's also an institution in which, and Bruce has actually aptly described that, Czechs might be interesting for Americans if they will be able to reach out to the interesting positions in the EU. That's the prerequisite. Defense, again, not bilaterally, but NATO, maintaining NATO. Economic, well, are we, I see West and Stacey here, are we interesting enough for, strategic US investors? Not necessarily the Czech Republic only, but as a region. I'm not sure. I think you spend a lot of time in improving the business environment here in this country. And I'm not sure it is seen as important. And the experience with US investors, I think if you name some of the US investments, they are not necessarily associated with a good experience, and for some people, they will start to talk about, okay, do we need another arbitration? We haven't done enough in actually embodying our relationship into really strategic business, and I'm glad that there will be the whole panel on that later on. I think this is of utmost interest. Now, values, ideas. These are not. This is not only about the talk about human rights and things like that. Our values are based on the respect to rule of law. Let's make the lower common denominator. This is not just about promoting some, nice ideas. And it's about the freedom of information, and hence I have to mention RFE, Radio Free Europe. When I assumed my position in the government, Sasha was Minister of Defense, 2010, as a Deputy Foreign Minister, I said to myself, wow, I have a broken glass in the Czech-US relation. And so I have to collect it and to glue it, but just small pieces, peanuts. And so I rediscovered RFE because I said to myself, okay, we don't have a radar, but we have a bunch of Americans working in RFE. And so let's work on that. But it's another issue which maybe will be discussed later on today and in another panel. R&D, I cannot agree more, and I wish in the next such event there would be people who are Americans working here in R&D, Czechs, successful Czechs working in research and development in the United States, in private sector, in all kinds. This goes without state-to-state intervention. We even don't know what potential is there in this area, and I wouldn't underestimate that. The strength of this country is not in resources, it's in brains. We have a good brains. I mean, this country has a very good resource, very good companies operating globally by, for example, in IT, in IT security, antivirus companies. I would like more of these people being involved into this, not necessarily only energy people, which energy security was mentioned, and there's a lot of expertise in that. My final point is third countries. Is it possible to develop this kind of triangular complementary formats where we would actually synergize our strength? US as a big power, Czechs with certain niche they having and doing things in the third countries. I think it might be a good model to do. Finally, as a region and the economic prospect of our region is very much related to the image it will have for not only for American investors but investors globally. There was a gloomy prediction that if there is going to be a crisis all around Europe, from East to Middle East, there will be no interest of businesses coming in, even though if the business environment would be great, because there is no promise of big profits in an area which is under recession. I think this message should be translated into our business circles, which should realize that this is not just either business or you do security. I mean, security in the perimeters of Europe are absolutely key for the business in this country. And this is, I think, the message on which I wanted to end up. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jiří. I have a question for you. I noticed on the clock that we've got slightly less than 15 minutes at this point. I'm going to withhold my question. Each of you has a question from me that you can respond to. But before you do, I just want to make sure that we do draw in the audience, and I'm going to ask for any questions from the audience that we can then go through the panel and address. Does anyone have a question over here on my right? And if you could please identify yourself before your question and the institution that you're with.
My name is Mitchell Belfer. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Central European Journal of International Security Studies from Metropolitan University in Prague. My question is to everybody, basically. Is the United States in decline? And if the United States is in decline, is that not the reason why it's starting to move backwards from its alliances and its alliance commitments? Thank you.
And over here on the right.
Jan Zahradil, I'm an MEP from the European Parliament. I have a question for both our American friends, which somehow stems from what Jiří Schneider has mentioned. Why both administrations, regardless whether Republican or Democrat, were so much supportive to a political side of European integration? Because it seems to me that US somehow do not understand quite well that the deeper political integration of Europe is, the less willing to cooperate with US it will be. that could be proved on a political level, I can tell you that it's almost touchable in these institutions. So, in my feeling, sometimes US, by supporting the political integration of Europe, is acting against its own strategic interests. So my question to you.
And maybe one more. Anyone else? Okay, so we've got several questions, and you guys can pick which ones you respond to. You've got some from me and some from the audience. We'll start with Bruce and just go down the panel.
Okay, let me go fast here. Politics isn't rocket science, it's ordinary life. I think the rules of ordinary life apply to politics. We all think we want sexual partners that say yes. We all marry them that say no. The same is true about allies. We don't want allies that say yes. We want allies that are strong enough and self-confident enough to say no. If you go down volunteerism, the three greatest volunteers to American projects in order are Georgia, Albania, and Montenegro. If you want to join that group, keep volunteering. If you have other options, as Wess suggests you do, I would suggest you use them. That's what they're for. And basically, I think there is a superpower. This is the only superpower that actually likes you. Compared to we despise Viktor Orban, we actively ignore Robert Fico, and we're annoyed palpably every time the polls open their mouth. So you're in a very good position. If you can't handle a superpower that likes you, you're going to have real trouble with the superpowers that don't like you when they come along. So the answer to all these questions is one thing. When we used to come to the Czech Republic, they said, when are we going to get into NATO? When are we going to get into NATO? And finally, Dan Fried got annoyed and said, you're going to get into NATO on the day you don't need it. It's absolutely correct. The same thing is true with the alliance with America. You're going to have an alliance with America the day you don't need it. So work on bringing about that day.
Indeed. Quick, where we can. Wes, thanks. You give me a point to, I felt nervous when speaking that I'd run out of time, so I'd like to take a moment to check my notes in front of me here called Obama criticism. Because indeed, I don't want it to sound like the administration is above criticism. Although I will say it, sometimes it can feel like the price of admission to the debate on US-Czech relations is to be critical of President Obama. Now, so in short, I think that I have continued to be frustrated, for example, by the president's tendency to emphasize first what he will not do, boots on the ground, going to war, rather than what he will do in the wake of the Russia crisis, rather than leaving it ambiguous in the sense that strategic diplomacy has always operated. And he continues to make it worse for himself, throwing gas on the fire by talking about not having a strategy and not seeming to fully understand that it's not just the American public that is listening while he speaks. My challenge, though, is really in some ways to take you at one point. It's that we criticize policies in a partisan sense that concerns me. And here I would return to, you've heard me say it before, but to Bill Clinton's advice to Tony Blair after George W. Bush was elected. Ideological soulmates, and he told Tony Blair, you should be George W. Bush's best friend. He seemingly would have nothing in line with their policies, but because that's the way that you will be able, he will need friends, and that's how you will keep the basis for that relationship. Merely it's a vision of wanting to have a comprehensive vision of the Czech-US relationship that is based in that constant effort to be looking for what we can do together. On the reset, I found myself thinking for the first time today that the challenge with the reset is that it's like first impressions being so hard to change. The first time you meet someone and you hear something, that's all you ever remember about them. So the reset policy, indeed, was never, from the Obama administration, I think, a belief that Russia could be transformed into a natural and close ally simply through engagement. It was the belief that in 2008, in the wake of the invasion of Georgia, relations were in such a perilous state that it was strategically necessary from a diplomatic response to try to change where things were. Now, in the first couple of years, you can argue that a new treaty on arms, new nuclear arms treaty, support for increased UN sanctions on Iran, and continued cooperation on Afghanistan were fruits from that policy. But let's be clear, after Vladimir Putin announced he was going to return to the presidency, it was over. The reset policy was not the basis for policy at any point after that. And they've been fairly clear, diplomatic, the way that you must be when you are the government, but at the same time that this is not the basis, the reset is not the basis for US-Russia relations any longer. So for me, I think that indeed it's we can then talk about have they done what they should have done or otherwise, but I think the reset in some ways has sort of framed or it sort of limited our thoughts on it. But indeed, it's a fair question. Hillary Clinton will be asked about it all the way to running to the presidency, should she do so. Now, one sort of comment on the groups here about blocks. While I agree with that in principle, I always sort of struggle with the notion that the Visegrad Four would be the best bloc. It's the natural geographic bloc, but I think Poland's strength has been cooperating on the Eastern Partnership with the UK and with Sweden. It's finding stronger partners in the rest of NATO and the European Union that has been the key to that success, not their ability to cooperate only in their neighborhood. Benelux is not a bloc per se, it's a way of putting people together or something. And it's having a strategic focus on what those blocs will be. I'm not saying that there have not been anything positive that's come of the Visegrad cooperation. I am not saying that it's something that should be abandoned. I am simply saying that's too narrow a focus for me to look for the kind of regional blockings in the way that the Czech Republic should be engaging more broadly. Why has the US been supportive of the European integration? I follow the logic of your case here, of your argument here, but I think simply the view has to be that a weak and fragmented Europe is also not in the interest of the United States. I don't think a strong Europe will always agree with the United States. I do think, maybe I'm echoing Wess's comments about strategic and structural interests, that we have common strategic interests in many ways that would undergird that, even if we would disagree. But I think if you look back dating to Kissinger and his speech in 1973, when he was the Secretary of State, he called for the Year of Europe. And he said, it is in our interests to have a strong and united Europe because it will be a better partner, we believe, in the United States. I don't think that means we would agree on everything, but a weak and divided Europe, we know, is not in our interests either.
So to your question, yes, I believe that we do have a permanent common interest, which is the same for the US and for the Czechs in this area, and it's simply security. And to the second part of your question, if Ukraine showed us, yes, it showed that the reset worked. But it worked for Russians. We have them back. It gave us topic, it gave us a little bit of waking up call, but it worked. But if we say that we do have Czech-American common interest, which is the security of this area, there are 5 sentences I must say. It shows that we are relevant to the United States, exactly as Bruce says, only if Russia is a problem. If Russia is not a problem, we are not that much sexy. If Russia is a problem, then we are technically a buffer zone from one side of the fence or the other side of the fence, as you said. Third, we really don't want to be a buffer zone because it's simply not safe and you are usually first to be beaten by both sides. The result is that if your only chance is that you matter if you are a buffer zone and you don't want to be the buffer zone, what is the way out? The way out logically, mathematically, would be to push the borders of Europe eastern from us. Well, we tried it with Ukraine, we see the result. It didn't work. So the controversial mathematical option, the only chance for us to be in the place on the map where we are and to matter for the United States is to be in the zone which was a former buffer zone and ceased to be the buffer zone because Russia became part of Europe. Which we go to the controversial suggestion of Miloš Zeman that Russian Federation should be member of the European Union in 20 years. If it didn't work with Ukraine because of Russia, how about the devil's advocate to try it with Russia? Then we would matter, and we still would be specialists on Russia, and we would not be the buffer zone. I don't say I want it. I pose it as a question. If you find any other mathematical option out of the situation where you don't want to be the buffer zone, you matter only as a buffer zone, and you need to matter.
As final words, Jiří, I wonder if you could just disagree with that for us. Could you disagree with that on my behalf?
What I should say, right or wrong, Miloš Zeman is the president of Czech Republic. Rather wrong, I would say. That's why I left the government. But I think he's wrong on that. And the problem is that, I mean, if he would be analyst and a speaker of our panel, that would be a fantastic point to make. But as a president of the country, an ally country, I think this is not the right thing to say. And decline, well, how you measure decline? Seen from outside, a few years ago, we wouldn't have expected a boom of shale gas and the change of U.S. energy policy. A few years ago, people would say the U.S. will always be dependent on the Middle East, on that. Now, I mean, I'm not saying it's all solved, but I mean, it's a different picture. A few years ago, who would say the Lehman Brothers would cause such an earthquake in the financial system? The vulnerability was revealed. So I think how you measure the strength, I think U.S. still holds very strong, and it's able to actually to revitalize, and this is I mean, enormous strength of U.S. You know, there's so many people doomed to United States for so many times before, and strangely enough, even to Americans themselves, America was able to survive that. So I think that's beyond numbers, different statistics, my source of, I wouldn't call it conviction, but assessment that United States is not on decline. So that's my, on this positive note, I wanted to end up, and if no American said it, I had to say it.
Well, there's never enough time on these panels. There's a lot more to be said on the subject, but we're 3 minutes now over, and we want to go to a break. And Sasha, I believe we're going to have a 15-minute break and then reconvene. Is that the plan? Okay. Thank you all for your participation in the panel, and please join me in giving a round of applause to the panelists.